Hi everyone, welcome back to this course on making your first info screen in React. For the last episode, we looked at how we could do this fetch call to an external server that's using one of these JSON APIs. Today we'll look at how we can display that data in our component. But before we do that, let's clean up some of this code that we've been given by our create React app thing. So looking at this thing, we want to clean it up and we just want to have our own code. The first thing that we want to do is remove the CSS. So if you've spent any time creating websites before, you probably already know that CSS is how we write styling for our website so that we can make them look nice and everything. And in this case, we can just remove the import because we've just imported this other file. So let's remove that, cut it away, and then look back at our thing, refresh, and then we see now there's no styling. That obviously looks very ugly, but it's just to clean everything up. And then I will remove this image that we didn't want. We'll remove the text hello world, and I'll also remove this header component that they have, which is fine like this. So now we're left with just, and I'll remove my own old console. Now we just have this div. That's the container for our app called app. We need this one. There's no way you can remove it. And our own components. And we'll also remove the import of the logo file because we're not using it anymore. There we go. Nice, clean little thing. Let's take a look at what it looks like. And here we go. Simply this. Oh, let's get rid of all that stuff in the background. But here we have only simply this thing in dad jokes here. And no more interesting stuff. Good. Now, let's look at cleaning this stuff up and displaying it as some sort of visual input. So we obviously have this, we're just logging the response right now, but we need to store it somehow. And if you've been doing some programming, you've probably stopped by variables in different programming languages and in JavaScript. And you might have been trying to make this into a variable, and you'll realize it doesn't really work in React the way you expect it to. And the reason is React kind of refreshes our components and our app all the time without us knowing, and we don't really have control of that sort of stuff. So any sort of information will get lost. But they have this neat little tool called a use state hook. I only say the word hooks because you will see that if you read about guides and everything. It's a kind of new improvement on React. It's not that new anymore, but it's still it's very popular. So, but it gives us access to this thing called state, and state is kind of the memory of a component. So let's do that. The first thing we need to do is import this thing called use state. You see this strange format. This means that we're importing a subpart instead of like an entire part like this. It doesn't really matter. Just write that thing and it'll work. And then we need to create our hook. And that we do in the beginning of our thing. We write this also slightly strange format. We write const. We write square brackets. We write dad joke. Actually, let's call it joke. And set joke. And then we say this is equal to use state. And that takes an empty object as a parameter. So we have this this weird thing now. Let me talk about what the format here means. So const is what we call variables, or is how we define variables in JavaScript. You might also know var. Var foo equal to like 10, for example, or let bar equals to 12. These are two other ways of creating variables in JavaScript. But const is a constant, and that's the one we use in almost all cases. In some cases, we might need to use this one called let, which is a variable we can change, but we just need constant. Var is the old way of writing variables in JavaScript, so you don't need to do that anymore. These two other ones are better. So now we have this slightly strange variable here, which means that we can use this joke in our program to to access the data that we've stored in this, and we can use a set joke to set some data there. So that's really what we want to do now. We know the data is right here. So let's write set joke here instead of console log. And now we've set this variable right here. And then we can console.log the joke. Let's actually console log the joke before we get the joke first, and I'll show you that it'll just be an empty object. Oh yeah, sorry, I completely forgot to finish this. So the constant is the how is it the variable? When we have these two brackets, we say we have two variables that will be made from an array which we get later, and then we say equals. That means it's equal to this value on the right side, and then we call useState, which will return these two values. It's a little bit complicated, but it doesn't matter that much anymore. The thing in here is an empty object, which is just our default value, so that things don't crash. Let's console log this joke and see what we get. If we go here, let's refresh because there's been a bunch of errors while we've been going. Oh, I'm realizing that I'm making some mistakes here, I think. Yeah, you can see a bunch of errors here, and that is because I have probably been calling Reddit non-stop, and we don't want to do that. Yes, okay, I made a mistake, and I made tons of calls to Reddit's API, and they blocked me for a little bit. And that's how it should work. I figured I would show you this way first, but I forgot that Reddit will stop me, and I will show you the better way soon. But then the important part here is that before we call the dad joke, we just get the empty object. So let's, since that other thing didn't really work, let's look at how we should actually call this function instead of just writing it here. So the problem is, you remember earlier we had this thing where it would double print our info. That's sort of this side effect thing that we can have in React where we sometimes call many more times. And in this case, we just wanted to call one time, so we're going to do that now. And to do that, we use this other function called useEffect. This useEffect is a way of creating side effects in React. So basically, when one thing happens, also do this thing. So what we want to do right now is useEffect, and this also has a slightly strange formula. It also takes an anonymous function, and that function has a body. So that's, remember what I said, this is a parameter, but this doesn't take any parameters, which returns a curly brackets, which is the function body. And it doesn't really matter what these things do. It should just work if you write it in. And then it has a special weird thing where you have to have a comma and then these square brackets at the end. So at this point, let's console log just hey to see what happens. And I'll explain more afterwards. So we can see here it printed hey. Okay, so this side effect thing that I said, what it's basically doing is whenever a value that's inside this variable is updated, we trigger the information that's inside here. Since there are no values inside this square bracket now, we are just saying call it once and only once at the beginning of the render. So whenever this component is created, we call that function, and that's it. And that's exactly what we want with our getJoke function. So let's call this getJoke function and see what happens. And then we want a second side effect right now before we see that working. We want, and that's written the same way with these strange patterns here. But inside these square brackets, we want a joke. So basically, if the joke value is updated, we want to console log that value. So this is, now you might see what the real intention of useEffect is. It's basically, if a value is updated, do something with that value. So that's interesting. Let's look at the browser and see what happens. If I refresh now, we can see, you saw instantly it printed this first one because this thing is also triggered at the beginning. It triggers when joke updates and when the component is rendered for the first time. So we console log joke while it was still the default value. And then after just a tiny bit of time, it prints again because the joke value is now updated. And that tiny bit of time is the time it takes for Reddit servers to respond to us. So now we have this data and it's stored in our variable, and that's super useful. So at this point, we can actually start talking about putting this out to the screen and not just in this format like this. So what we're going to do here is go down to our return function. And the return function, that's where we write what we call rendering. I've maybe said this word rendering a few times now without explaining it, so let's do that. Rendering basically means painting something to the screen. So it's just displaying some sort of information. You might know it a lot from games where we talk about rendering objects in the distance and that sort of stuff. And that means basically these objects are put on the screen from things. So the same thing the browser does. So let's convert this this div with dad jokes, and inside it we're gonna make actually, let's first give it a class name. So class names are, if you've used made any websites before, you probably know that class names are used to target CSS, but it's also useful just to tell us what this component is about, so that we can see, okay, this is a joke. Let's use that then. And then inside of this div, we will write a p tag. A p tag is a paragraph of text. So in this paragraph text, let's just write, this is a p tag. And you can see the format here is square bracket, like crocodile brackets, p, close crocodile brackets, and the ending tag is the same thing with a slash before the p. Let's look and see we have now this p tag instead. It's fine, you probably expected that. But the interesting thing was if we can actually use our data here. And now we want these curly brackets, because that means we can write JavaScript again. And we want to access our variable called joke. And this I've checked before. We want the attribute on the joke called title. Remember how I said most of the joke is in the title for Reddit. So if we go back now we should see the actual title here, and that's pretty interesting. Now we get this right from Reddit. Obviously, I also said that we need this to include the self text, which is the body of the joke. So let's do that as well. Joke.selftext. It's self text in one word. I'm pretty sure. Let's see. And then refresh this. Oh yeah, here we go. Now we have the joke here and the text here. And that's it for this component, I think. Let's call it that for this episode, and we'll be back next time with a little bit more on this component before we move on to a second style of component.